Republican Resurgence is, or what the conservative resurgence is. A resurgence is a rebirth. It's a comeback, okay? It pretty much started with Richard Nixon. Nixon's the one that started, okay? It would have raged like a tsunami if he had not got caught in Watergate, okay? And guys, think about this for a second. Nixon is the first president to resign from office. He's guilty, okay? It is something that should have destroyed the Republican Party. Guys, this is worse than what happened to the Federalists at the Hartford Convention. But it didn't. Okay, Gerald Ford serves out his term. Gerald Ford is an American president who was never elected. He never got to re-elect his own term. Then Jimmy Carter comes around. Jimmy Carter was so bad that it caused the Americans to forget all about Watergate. In the 4 years that Carter was president, the greatest presidential scandal in history, people forgot about it. Okay? One reason is Americans were embarrassed. Americans were embarrassed that a bunch of Iranian students had captured our embassy. Okay? They were embarrassed that we had a plane crash in the desert. They were embarrassed that our president had boycotted the Olympics in Moscow because they were in Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter's foreign policy is pretty much what cost him the election in 1980. Americans voted for Reagan because they wanted some pride back, and more than anything else, they wanted those hostages home. They got what they wanted. Okay? One of the most stirring things about this, I was in the Navy at this time, I remember this, is how amazed I was that it was only minutes after they announced Reagan's victory that they let the hostages go. Not even enough time for the Americans to make a phone call. Okay? The minute the Iranians got news of Ronald Reagan's victory, they turned the hostages loose. And that tells you all you need to know about Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Okay? So the conservative resurgence, Americans believe that the Democrats are running away with inflation, so maybe the Republicans can bring us back to where we were before. Okay? Right. The Democrats, okay, they're going to be hurt by liberalism. Okay? Always remember this about Democrats. They want social programs. They want New Deal programs. They want Great Society programs, okay? Jimmy Carter wanted that, okay? These are liberal moves when you have social programs, but you got to pay for them with taxes. So when a Democrat is president, typically what you'll see is you'll see these social programs funded by tax increases, okay? Americans don't like tax increases. So it's an inherently weak proposition to begin with. Jimmy Carter was hurt by this. And the reason is he was very limited what he could do because his administration was typified by inflation. That was target number one for Carter. Okay? Okay. The fact that Jimmy Carter was devoted to the New Deal, the Great Society, won't help him any. When you sit here and say, yes, we've got runaway inflation and your money, America, is pretty much worth nothing, okay? But I still want to have these social programs. Americans tend to think you're doing what's best for them. They don't think you're doing that, okay? They think you care more about the party than you do about the people. So that's what's going to hurt him. The fact that he was not flexible enough to compromise his devotion to liberal idealism is what hurt him, okay? Okay. By 1990, of course this goes through Reagan and Bush, you'll see the Democrats start to be more moderate. Guys, it's extremely important to remember that Bill Clinton was a moderate, okay? He was a moderate at the time when America needed a moderate. When Desert Storm was over with, George Bush's popularity rating was sky high. It always is after a war, okay? In 1992, the Democrats knew they couldn't beat him. He's got this huge popularity, plus he just won a war for us. Okay? So they can't come at him on foreign policy. Bush will kill him. So what they did was they found something else. They found out that after the war was over with, just like after every war, you start to have a bit of recession. Okay? The Democrats seized on that. And when Bill Clinton ran for president, he said, hey, look, America, we know we just won a war. We know we just freed Kuwait, but that's not what the problem is. It's the economy, stupid. That's why they embraced that, okay? So embracing that is going to lead Clinton to beat Bush because he diverted attention away from foreign policy to the economy. And when he came in, he said, don't be afraid, okay? I'm not a liberal Democrat. I'm not going to tax and spend. I'm just going to look at where we're at right now and see what kind of deal I can cut with Congress to make things better. He was a moderate. He's probably the only half-breed Democrat in history. Okay?
And didn't with the fact that Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes, and then went back on that, Clinton, they used that big time against him. He went back on that. What else are you going to go back on?
You can't trust him.
You can't trust Bush.
Right.
Right.
One thing that he did, and this is something that Democrats never do, we haven't talked about it much, is Democrats like big government. Okay, Franklin Roosevelt wanted a whole New Deal bureaucracy. Lyndon Johnson created HUD and EEOC and everything. They loved big bureaucracy. Clinton cut them. Clinton went in and cut these things and streamlined the bureaucracy, which saves tons of money. Okay, and this is just an example of him being a moderate. Okay, Bill Clinton did a lot of Republican-like things. All right? He increased taxes on the wealthy, which is not a Republican thing, okay? But he did it in increments. He didn't go and say, okay, boom, we're going to hit you with a 60% tax. He did it in increments, okay? He did it in increments so they could accept it. So while he increased taxes on the wealthy, it did not hurt them to the point where we were doing things like shutting down manufacturing plants and shipping them down to Mexico. This is a big one. This is a Republican thing he did, okay? He did not do what Democrats do and regulate everything in sight. Bill Clinton maintained laissez-faire. Guys, that's almost blasphemy, okay? He looked at what Reagan had done with deregulation, okay? He looked at what Bush had done, and he kept it, okay? A lot of Democrats in Congress were pissed about this, but he kept it, he said, because this is best for our government. Remember, guys, under Bill Clinton, people gained jobs. Unemployment, especially for Hispanics and African Americans, were at all-time lows. And the reason is this, typically speaking, when you sit here and you back away and let business do its thing, laissez-faire, business will create jobs. Clinton knew that. That's why he did not regulate them. Okay? The Republicans have a hard time because Bill Clinton economically was a good president. We had a federal revenue surplus. The Republicans during this time, it starts and begins with Ronnie, the Reagan Revolution. When Reagan rode into town, you guys all know that Ronald Reagan's a former actor. Okay, he starred in movies and things. The most famous movie he starred in was Bedtime for Bonzo. He starred him and a monkey. Okay, he's been in a lot of westerns. And in the westerns, he was always the cowboy that rode off into the sunset. Okay, well, when he rides into town here, there's a new sheriff in town. Reagan says, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Okay? Okay. First of all, this is important. When Ronald Reagan becomes president, you see a huge increase in the Republican Party. People were leaving the Democratic Party in droves. And the reason is pretty much because of the failures of the Carter administration. Okay? So this is the Democratic shift. This is when the Republican Party will enjoy its biggest population in its history. Okay? So people become Republicans. Ronald Reagan was called the Great Communicator. Okay? He had begun his professional life as a radio announcer. Okay, in Illinois, he would call football games. Okay? When he got to California, he was also a radio announcer and became an actor. So he knew media. He knew public policy. When he was elected governor of California, when he served that term, he had a call-in radio show. I used to listen to it. Okay, so Ronald Reagan knew how to talk to the American people. Okay, his is the most distinct presidency, said FDR. When you talk about presidents in the 20th century, you start off with Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, then you go to FDR, then you go to Reagan. Those are the ones that people talk about the most. Not even Woodrow Wilson and not even Bill Clinton. Okay. All right, we talked about this. This is in the reading. All he's going to do is trickle down. Because so many people were unfamiliar with trickle down, it had been since the 1920s, they called it Reaganomics. Okay? What he wants to do is, first of all, to slay the beast inflation. That's what plagued Carter. And Reagan said, I'm going to take this theory, this trickle-down theory, and we're going to win. WIN was an acronym. It stood for Whip Inflation Now. They had buttons you could wear that said, be sure to wear your WIN button. Okay? So he's going to tame inflation, and he will. It will practically disappear under Ronald Reagan. But at the same time, and listen carefully, okay, he's going to increase the defense budget. That's a big deal. So all the gains he got with trickle down were offset by the fact that he increased the federal budget, the federal deficit, because of the defense budget. That's important. So trickle down economics was not wholly successful. It was successful in doing what he wanted, creating jobs and things like this, okay? Whipping inflation. But the fact that he wanted to win the Cold War more than he wanted to sit here and stable the economy means he spent more money than he probably should have, okay? And that's going to sit here and increase the federal deficit, okay? That's an important point. Wink, wink, hint, hint. Okay, everybody good? Okay. They ended the Cold War. What weapon did they use? It's the one that worked back in the 1950s that nobody realized. The economy. The threat that we could build Star Wars is what ended the Cold War. Okay? If you ever write an essay on something like this, always remember that the one weapon the United States always had that the Russians could never replicate, no amount of spies could build it, was our economy. It was a market economy. We can create wealth when we want to. A command economy can't. Okay? And when Reagan sat down with Gorbachev and told him about this wonderful new thing called the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, the first thing Gorbachev thought was, oh my God, how in the hell can we spend this thing? We can't afford it. I've got people starving to death. The threat, and guys remember, SDI didn't exist. It was a bluff on Reagan's part. But the threat that we could actually spend the money to do it is what brought Gorbachev to the realization that maybe we should step back from a command economy. That led to perestroika, was when you dismantled the command economy. And that ended the Cold War. Okay? This is what we just talked about. In 1992, Bush's biggest advantage was they had won the Gulf War. Okay? But when Clinton came up and redirected the American people to the economy, he lost that advantage. A lot of people claim that the Democratic Party created a false recession. That there really wasn't a recession. They went and told people this, okay? And then they said that, okay? I haven't seen any evidence of it, okay? But knowing the way politics are, it wouldn't surprise me. Okay. Is everybody good? That's it.